Welcome to tonight's Thursday night edition of the Clown Hour Podcast. I'm Scott Burks. Please check me out on www.theclowntimes.net. That's my sports blog. You see it here. And speaking of which, get the merchandise at cafepress.com. Search for the Clown Time Sports. You'll find hats, sweatshirts, hoodies, t-shirts, mouse pads, almost like Shirley Cheese season. You name it. So anyway, go to cafepress.com, search for Clown Time Sports. You'll find some gear there. I appreciate it if you cop a little bit of it. And also, please go to facebook.com. Look for me just where you're on your smartphone, laptop, desktop, wherever you are, wherever it may be. Just type in the Clown Times. That's Clown Sport with K. You'll find me there as well. Posting Reddit sophomore sports related memes, which, you know, Brett Favre and Halloween. That's all you need to know. And one last thing, please continue to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Picking up more subscribers, trying to get to 1,000 so I can get this bad boy monetized. I'm more than halfway there. So thank y'all for that. And even if, and I can guarantee you that you're not going to like what either me or Dwayne will have to say. Just as well gets tonight. So either way, just comment. We like the back and forth. It's entertaining. Because either way, you'll be glad you did, and I'll be glad. Okay, so I teased the win earlier. So since we're talking all things HBCU, I'm gonna bring you to my my co-host and my guest and our guest. So let's start with Dwayne. Y'all know him from the Yards at HBCU Sports, raps about all things HBCU sports, as well as Sleazy Radio every Tuesday night on Facebook Live and YouTube. And last but not least, his great work with HeroSports.com, who writes all things FCS athletics as it pertains to HBCU, excuse me. Dwayne Nash is back in the house to talk more HBCUs. And our guest, who's making his maiden voyage into the Clown Hour podcast, he's using his description, his words, not mine, South Louisiana guy. He's Fox 54 News sports director. He's a proud graduate of Southern University, played college ball, part of his member of the National Association of Black Journalists. Mo Carter's in the house. How you doing?
Hey guys, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. Of course, I've been enjoying the podcast, the video, and work you guys have been doing. So appreciate you guys bringing me on to, talk about some of my favorite things, which include HBCU athletics and aesthetics.
You know what? We appreciate you, man. And I tell Dwayne this. I try to give him his flowers because he comes on once a week to talk all things HBCUs. We usually do this on Mondays called HBCU Mondays, but with schedules. We have been doing that the past month, but it's all good anyway. Do it a Wednesday night, HBCU Mondays on Wednesday nights. But anyway,
man, we deal with this thing called life, so it's
going to happen. Especially with family men with careers, not jobs, careers. So
correct.
We got to do what we do.
And I mean, I don't know what the family aesthetics are for you guys, but I have a 2-year-old now, so
oh, God bless you.
Wait a minute, a good 2-year-old, Mo, or an average 2-year-old?
I'm going to go ahead and say he's an average 2-year-old only because he tries to get away with a lot of things with my wife and I or whatever, but then daycare, children's church, oh my God, little Mo is like the little perfect child. He's always well-mannered and disciplined. Not saying he's not disciplined with us.
Sure, of course.
But I just see a different level of it,
That's so funny,
but see,
man.
the thing is, you didn't just take off with that answer to the negative. So that lets me know he's a pretty cool son. Yes. So that's what where I lie with it, and I've seen we all seen some interesting 2-year-olds.
Agreed. And look, that little joke is smart too. I mean, we don't have enough time to talk about how intelligent he is or whatever. But let's just say this. With 4 HBCU degrees in our household or whatever, there's a good possibility he'll probably end up adding to it for one, and it also kind of just shows our worth too. But like I said, well, let's get back to the sports portion. We'll leave the family thing aside.
Well, I think we're all fathers of sons. Minus 12. Dwayne's is grown. So
22.
There you go. So I mean, it's cool. It's a beautiful thing seeing us sharing this fatherhood thing. This thing called fatherhood. So anyway, before we get into this, talk about your journey, right quick, in your industry, Mo. We usually do this for people making their first time in the podcast. Like, it doesn't have to be long and drawn out. Just what got you to where you're at right now, kind of like Drake's start from the bottom, now I'm here. kind of thing.
I got you. Well, look, just to tell you a little bit about myself for people that don't know, I grew up in a little small town called Napoleonville, Louisiana. It's along the bayous of South Louisiana, maybe a little over an hour away westward of New Orleans, near like Thibodaux, Houma, Morgan City, down that area. Obviously, I've been ingrained in HBCU things basically my whole entire life. I can say in my family, my sister and I are now fourth generation HBCU graduates. Of those four generations, three generations graduated from HBCUs. Of course, my sister and I, we graduated from Southern University. Our parents actually graduated from Nicholls State University, which is like right down the road. But the thing was, for them coming out of high school, that was really around the desegregation times and whatnot. And a lot of the PWIs within Louisiana were basically doing their best to give away minority scholarships at its best or whatever. So that allowed, my parents to basically, basically in a nutshell, get free education or whatever. And heck, I think my mom said they ran a bus or whatever and stuff too. So kind of shows you what kind of dedication they were to trying to kind of do that in the 70s and 80s. But prior to that, my grandfather, the Reverend John C. Wickham, he received his education at the now closed Leland College, which was right outside of Baton Rouge in Baker, Louisiana. Famous Leland alum includes Coach Eddie Robinson, the original Eddie Robinson, not Alabama State's one, which I'm about Graham one. Nowadays we got to make that differentiation because certain people don't know the history of certain ethnics or whatever. And then his parents, my great-great-grandfather, Reverend John Sr. and Minerva Wickham, they were actually graduates of Straight University in New Orleans. For many who have never heard of Straight University, what happened was Straight University merged with New Orleans University to create what we now know as Dillard University in New Orleans.
Okay.
So, I like I said, I've been ingrained in HBCU aesthetics basically my whole entire life. Obviously, ended up playing football at Southern University in the mid to late 2000s under the great Coach Pete Richardson. I always tell people I owe Southern University three things for the most part: quality education, opportunity to play college football, and that's where met my loving wife, the former Lakeisha Adams, as well. So, big shout out or whatever to them. Obviously, doing a lot of things in the communications department. I started off at WAFB in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, as a sports producer and reporter. Eventually led to an opportunity at KALB in Alexandria, Louisiana, News Channel 5, in which I covered Louisiana College, Northwestern State, Grambling, Louisiana Tech. Moved over to Montgomery, Alabama, where I was at Alabama Newsnet and WAKA. Covered Alabama State, Tuskegee. I was also Alabama State's play-by-play guy for 2 years for football and basketball. So I got Reggie Barlow's last year and Brian Jenkins's first year. And then I've been here in Huntsville for about 6 years now at Fox 54 WZDX and kind of do an array of things. The best thing, though, is that I've been doing this for like 13 years. And I'll tell everybody I'm blessed about it. Yeah, certain days will get kind of rough here, there, and everywhere, but I wake up and I'm like, hey, I get a chance to do something that I truly love. And obviously, a lot of people don't get these opportunities. So I definitely not only take advantage of it, but I try to, attack it and do my best at the highest level on it. Because at the end of the day, not everybody gets the opportunity, for one. And then two, somebody's always coming for your job as well.
Sure. Yeah,
we'll say this. A lot of times you guys hear me talk about the media aspect of HBCU athletics. I'm cheating off of Mo's paper. Whatever Mo has to say about it, I know he's most definitely entrenched in that arena. I got to go see what Mo got to say. And I most definitely will cheat off his paper, but at the same time, I'll give him credit. So I don't want you out here thinking, Mo, that I'm just out here stealing your stuff and, just and not giving no credit. Because there are a lot of us out there that do that. But Mo, first and foremost, thank you for making time to show up on the show and coming up here and enlighten us. Because there's a lot of things that we have questions about that we most definitely know that you have the answers for, and would love to get those answers from you.
Oh, it's no problem, man. It is no problem. And I mean, like you said about how you're getting off the cheat sheet or whatever, I can kind of do the same thing. And I mean, if I kind of started rolling off the list of people, I kind of go off of, we'd probably be here all night, but I'll just name a few, like Dr. Kenyatta Cavill, for example.
Most definitely.
Yes.
For sure. The homies at HBCU GameDay with Tolly and Stephen A. Gaither. And then another person too, you usually see him on the ESPN Plus with SIAC, is my good friend James Verrett as well. You know, and if you're in the Atlanta area, you may recall James being the sideline reporter for the Atlanta Hawks in the late 2000 and early 2010. So, you know, obviously, you know, we kind of all feed off of each other or whatever, just in general. And I mean, at the end of the day, too, you know, I don't come with no BS. Like I don't. Like when I make comments or whatever, like I'm usually based off of facts. Because one thing that people don't know in TV, if I come around and mess around and give you some wrong stuff, my job is probably not going to be for me, you know, coming up in that sense. So, you know, so you know that's why we got to hit it with the straight facts and whatnot. So, and I mean, I'm not confrontational or nothing, but at the end of the day, I don't like to see people make a fool of themselves. So that's why I try to help them with the truth on certain.
That's a nice way of saying enlightening. That's a nice way of saying
like seriously, man. Like I do not. Also, you also have to know what lane you're supposed to be in as well. Thus, for instance, I don't correct my wife on certain things because I don't want to be locked out the house, you know, in scenarios. Or let me add it like this: my wife is an accountant, plus she's an auditor. So you can just imagine. I don't have conversations about money with her in certain scenarios, or
that's
whatever, unless we're trying to find a way to add money to the household. But
there you go.
It's kind of that scenario. Know your lane in situations.
And speaking of knowing lanes, like Dwayne said, we got questions regarding like work of HBCUs in light of especially SWAC being the flavor of the month the last couple of years, counting. Because I always would say, man, Dwayne and I, we're not like this, obviously, but we go back and forth with like why the SWAC is the way the position is right now. How can they properly, I don't want to say monetize because they're already getting paid, like technically, but still, how they make the most of it. So, for example, I always liken it to some of the Power Five, not to compare it to the Power Five, just from based on principle. To me, if you're a conference and if you got the most brands or the branding, that's going to make you very profitable. Like the SEC, you're an SEC country. So the SEC, for example, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, brands, and probably a little bit more. And then you're going to add Oklahoma and Texas in a couple of years. Brands galore. People want to see those brands. People know about those brands, right? Even a lay fan. So you just pose that with the SWAC, Grambling, Southern. I mean, you know this. You're a Louisiana guy. Grambling, Southern, Jackson State, FAMU. Some people would say Alco State's a brand. I mean, they got the brands. They got the brands not only HBCU athletics, but pretty much of FCS, if you want to be honest about it. So, my thing is, we go back and forth of like, okay, when you say they should get an HBCU sports channel through ESPN. That was like maybe 3 or 4 years ago, right, Dwayne? Now you say stupid stuff like that. So, and they don't know we're streaming everything, but you in the television industry, Mo. So just educate me, man, because I'm really leaning on both you and Dwayne. So if you were to advise the SWAC commission how they could monetize this, where it be like a linear cable network through either ESPN, Fox Sports, whoever, or is it be like a streaming device like HBCUGo? Where would their best avenue of the most cash they could get?
So believe it or not, because the SWAC is still an FCS level conference right now, streaming is the best option.
Okay.
With an opportunity to go to linear. And the reason why I say that is that really through the years, production costs for linear have become sky high.
Yes. Oh, most definitely.
And you know, I can talk about that from a local standpoint. Like for instance, you know, working the news or whatever, you may see one of us live somewhere or whatever, you know, via either satellite or through our backpack stuff or whatever that we have there. One thing we've been told is, hey, we've got a certain time window to literally have that stuff up, because for as long as that broadcast is up, it costs money. So let's say I'm going live from a game that I'm about to preview or whatever, and my whatchamacallit is at 6:25. They may not want us to turn that thing on until like 6:15, because as soon as 6:15 go, it's like the clock runs, or whatever and stuff. And because of that, money starts to cost in that scenario. So think about how it is for games, and think about how it is for other programs. Like, these things cost. Now, granted, because you have big time sponsorships that we'll talk about in just a little bit or whatever, they kind of offset those costs. But because of that, that's why, digital is becoming more prominent in certain situations. Don't get me wrong, linear still rules everything when it comes to the top dollar, but you also have to kind of understand and also know your worth on scenarios. And actually, I think right now with HBCUGo, with the connection between Dr. Charles McClellan, the commissioner, Byron Allens, and Mr. Simons from HBCUGo, what they have right now, I think, is a perfect scenario for something that's going to be able to be built upon moving forward. And when I say that is this, obviously, they came out with an 11-12 game schedule or whatever this year. Plus then Byron Allen did his thing with the syndication packages, to where you had so many different markets that were showing the whatever game on television. Plus the Griot TV, which used to be Black News Channel, also showing that as well. That is literally the same thing that the SEC did in the 1980s and 90s with Jefferson Pilot Sports. If anybody knows about Jefferson Pilot was the thing that really put the SEC for football on the map during those times or whatever. And if you act like you've never heard Jefferson Pilot, I'll just go ahead and just say this. Go to YouTube, pull up the Bluegrass Miracle, the game where LSU, when Nick Saban was a coach, Marcus Randall threw the long touchdown pass to beat Kentucky. That was on Jefferson Pilot. And it wasn't until I got in high school that I realized Jefferson Pilot wasn't even a national brand. It was a regional brand, but everybody was buying into syndicated packages. And because of that, that's how the SEC brand definitely was built up to where now where they have things in general or whatever with ESPN and we're really ESPN, because the CBS thing ends after this year or whatever. Now, I'll also will say this, that brand with HBCUGo is going to help Dr. McClellan with his negotiations when the ESPN contract that was previously done by Dewar Sharp, and we're just going to say his name and just leave it alone or whatever.
Wow.
So when it was previously done by whatever, like, it was pretty much a stranglehold for the conference as far as what they could get and all that. So when the McClellan can redo this in about a year or two, that HBCUGo package, that's going to be like his ace in the hole. Was it like, well, look, I've got this going on or whatever. You see what we're doing. How much help can we get to make it look better in our scenarios? And I can't wait to see how that goes on. Now, as far as a whole SWAC channel, I would love to see it personally, but there's a lot that goes into that.
Sure.
I know people will say, oh, the SEC has theirs, the ACC has theirs, Pac-12 has theirs or whatever and stuff. Yeah. But those things took a long time to get right and get ready. And no offense, but I just don't think the SWAC is in that position now. And the reason why I say that, you got to think, it's not just football and basketball and baseball. Like, SEC Network shows every single sport. So that means you got to either have your money right for production companies, or these schools have to have their money right for production things. And then we got to remember, sports season ends roughly May. So what are you showing in June and July and early August? What are you showing when you're not having live sports as well? So there's a lot of things you have to work it as far as component-wise to make those things happen. Could we have a full SWAC TV network in the future? Absolutely. Would I say we're going to have it tomorrow or next year or probably in 2 years? Probably not, just because there's just more work that needs to be done. And quite frankly, I feel that right now is just not the time, especially when you don't have the support from other major networks.
Right. Well said. Dwayne, you got a question right quick?
A lead up and then a question. One, you talk about Jefferson Pilot. Of course, when Scott raised his hand, that's because Scott and I are most definitely familiar with Jefferson Pilot because of their association with the ACC. And growing up with that in the early 80s, 90s, and of course moving down to the Carolinas in the 90s and 2000s, that's all I was surrounded by. So when you said it, I had no idea that they also had a relationship with the SEC, and that's something like you said there, Mo, where if HBCUGo wants to decide to connect with, because I know they already have a relationship with the CIAA, correct?
They do. So the CIAA, I say last year, at Media Day announced that they will have a partnership with HBCUGo, which leads me to believe come next year, you're probably going to have 2 HBCUGo games a week, probably one CIAA, one SWAC. And rumor mill, you may be able to help me out a little bit more or whatever, because this is more your country or whatever. I heard the MEAC may be trying to get a part of that as well. So,
okay.
Yeah, like I said, I've heard that or what. I can't confirm it, but I've kind of heard it through certain circles. But for sure, CIAA is definitely trying to is hooking up with Byron Allen and HBCUGo. So I would not be surprised if come next year, you got CIAA in the early time slot and then SWAC in the later time slot. And also keep in mind, this is still a secondary deal. It's not even a primary deal.
Exactly.
It is not the primary deal. So if they can expand that as well, I think a lot of good things come from that. And I know people will be like, well, why can't it be the primary or whatever? Because their stuff looks a whole lot better. And okay, I can't explain why it can't be the primary and all that. You got to, make the phone call down to Birmingham. But I can tell you, it looks better in certain instances because when I went to Alabama A&M versus Grambling, I got there early to kind of see what's going on. They've got their own satellite truck. They've got their own staff of producers and field directors and cameramen. They even bought their own scissor lift, man, to just show you that's how invested they are or whatever it is. Remember, that's one game a week. So it's not hard to go from one place to another place or whatever. If they wanted to add more, then you get into the production cost stuff. You do. And because you get into that becomes, I'm not going to say troublesome, but it becomes costly. It really does. But if the return on the investment is worth it and Byron Allen puts in a little bit more money, then, we could see some more things happening or whatever with that. But I will say keep an eye on what it looks like when it goes to grow. I don't know if you guys saw the basketball one that came out for the SWAC. They've got, I think, a total like 36 games, which includes like 18 doubleheaders, for the SWAC, which starts, I want to say maybe January 2nd or 3rd. And then, kind of runs through the end of the season. Some very interesting matchups on that. So, so that basketball, I don't know if they're going to be able to tie baseball into it, but for basketball, for sure, they're definitely go with it. And also remember, this is still like the infancy stage.
Right.
I think more things will come from it. They'll kind of reconvene. And then I'm pretty sure at SWAC Media Day next summer, Dr. McClellan will be on that stage talking about like, hey, here's our year 1 win or whatever. Here's how we plan to, get the year 2 with it. And then I also have to go ahead and say this. I think the fact that adding Charlie Neal to it gives that nostalgia effect, gives you that gives you that throwback version of BET from back in the day or whatever. So I think that kind of, draws a lot of people into it as well. I gotta throw that one back into in a sense, hey, Charlie, voice of Black college sports and athletics for a very, very long time.
Most definitely. But it's interesting that you bring up the production costs because, when I say it, people look at me crazy in terms of production costs. And I know it because, one, a buddy of mine is on the production side of it that, he not only does he do it with other networks, but he also does it with ESPN as well. So I've seen him at University of Maryland. I've seen him at Howard University. I've seen him at various institutions in terms of how they do their setup. And then talking to MEAC Commissioner Sandra Steele, she talked about it from the production side, where they have students and a lot of times helping out to kind of cut back on costs, but at the same time getting those students that experience. So when people always complain about it, I'm like, one, be happy that we at least have it on something to watch because it was just a few years ago. Let's not act like it was 20, 30, 40 years ago where HBCU games weren't being broadcasted anywhere. It was like maybe 5 years ago when we got a game a week. Now you get almost the entire slate, if not the entire slate, for various conferences on a weekly basis. Let's be happy we have that. But
Absolutely.
God, man, we can't just be happy for some of the for some of the advances that we have. Everything got to come out the gate, and everything got to look like
the microwave
what's going
effect
on ESPNU on a weekly basis, or ESPN One to be more serious about this. When people say, why doesn't our production look like the production of an SEC game?
Well,
you should already know the answer to that.
Yeah, it doesn't, because of the quality, for one, and what they actually put into it as well. As I mentioned, HBCUGo, they bring their own stuff. So when the ESPNs and the CBSs of the world go to these big, they're bringing their own stuff to go ahead and go with it for it to look like that. A lot of the digital stuff that you see, a lot of that stuff is the equipment that's used at the schools, maybe with a little help here or there. Now, of course, it varies from conference to conference, and I understood that a few years ago. So I'm here in Huntsville, so I covered the University of North Alabama in Florence. They were a D2 power in football for a long time, and they decided to move up to FCS D1, officially D1 this year or whatever, where all their records count and go to postseason and whatnot. Well, at the time, they were competing in the Big South for football while the ASUN had all the other sports. One of the first things they said was, hey, for football, all of our stuff is going to be on ESPN Plus or 3, so you guys have to do everything in-house. So I'll never forget getting the press release saying that University of North Alabama is creating like some kind of fundraiser fund type thing or whatever. A few weeks later, they raised enough money. They raised about $400,000, if I remember correctly, and they basically bought themselves like a media truck. And basically what it was a trailer that they could back up to the stadium or back up to the baseball or basketball arenas, connect or whatever in there, have a director, and then connect their cameras. And guess what? Now their stuff is looking like ESPN3, ESPNU quality, and they can do all that right then and there. So they are so that was one of the first things they had to do to even get up to the par of where they were at. And then I kind of started noticing like how Jacksonville State or whatever was doing that or whatever in the ASUN, and also in the OVC, and then some of the other in-state schools like Troy and South Alabama, they were literally doing the same thing. So not saying it could not be done, but it just depends on where your investments are in certain instances from that. So yeah, it's definitely on an investment tip. And also this stuff still costs money, guys. And you talk about the people who work and do this. Yeah, there are students around, but I'm gonna keep it real with y'all. You can't force every student to work on a production staff. You just can't, especially if they ain't getting paid or whatever. I'm gonna just keep it real. That's the things I've heard when I speak to some people or whatever. You can't. So you get the dedicated ones, but then sometimes it's pulling teeth to try to get whoever and stuff, and it depends on what school you're at, to wherever you can get the production and the work for the production will really, really just depend. Hopefully the mindset will be able to change for certain people moving forward, but that's one flaw you do have to kind of deal with, moving forward.
Yeah, that's great
too.
That's great to know. I mean, again, I'm getting educated, so that's why I'm quiet. Now I'm like, okay, yes, good point. Because again, I'm coming at this. I mean, even though like I went to graduate school at North Carolina A&T, I mean, like Dwayne and I are both Aggies, but the thing is, I come at it still as an outsider. So just getting on this journey, this HBCU journey, if you will, I find the stories fascinating, and it helps that I'm connected with this guy below us. So it's like I'm learning from. Really, I'm cheating off of history. Dwayne's paper, just learn from him. But I say all to say this, man. We talked about like lead up to game day, ESPN GameDay being in Jackson, right? So it was a whole production. We all seen it, right? There was a whole production. Southern was there for Southern versus at Jackson State. Of course, Jackson State whopped the hell out of them. But that's another conversation. But the point is that the attention, the eyeballs that descended upon Jackson, Mississippi, having the game day crew there, having like Desmond Howard hanging out with Coach Prime throughout the week, having what's the name of that pitcher, former punter, Pat McAfee.
Pat McAfee, yeah.
Going to like step shows, doing a live video from a step off, from a step show, and how he's enjoying himself. That this is all new to him, and he's not embarrassed to admit that. And so he and seeing him on game day, just egging the crowd on, getting involved with the crowd. I mean, they were just learning what we know and love. And so to see all that was a beautiful thing. So I say all that to say this. now that the SWAC, I call them that as a flavor of the month because again, they got the brands. They're just their popular in terms of general popularities has grown, especially since George Floyd's murder. Let's just be real about that too. So because a lot of the attention been on HBCUs, the point is HBCUs and all things Black culture. But I would argue, and I know you have some things to say about this. I argue that a unicorn known as Coach Prime has done a lot of this. It's the Prime effect, as I call it. Some people have argued back and forth about that. I know that you have some things to say, Mo, about your 2 cents on this whole phenomena here. So give me let's just again give us your thoughts on what's made the SWAC in particular so the most popular has been, like, generally speaking, in all of America is Ben, and it's like turning to the gold mine that President like Commissioner McCullum is sitting.
Well, obviously, we can talk about the popularity of the SWAC. Definitely falls a lot on the back of Deion Sanders. You know, you're talking about a guy who was a self-promoter as a player, one of the best to definitely ever do it for sure. Right. You know, whether he was with the Falcons or he's with the 49ers or the Cowboys or another team that you guys used to root for or whatever from there. But, you know, obviously, you know, people are definitely tuning in or whatever to that, which, you know, has definitely been a very, very good thing. And I know people will probably look at me and be like, man, you are this or you are that or whatever. It's funny. You've never really come out and heard me actually say I have a disliking to what Coach Sanders is whatever for doing. Now, there's certain things he said I'm kind of like, Coach should have talked to somebody or whatever about that, you know, before you have to put out a corrected statement and stuff from that. But, you know, he's one of those guys where, you know, when he speaks, a lot of people pay attention to him and a lot of people listen and, you know, people will go. Obviously, getting Travis Hunter as a top recruit was definitely a big thing as well. And I mean, hey, you know, he's definitely putting more eyeballs on the HBCU product. The thing I will say to I guess you say kind of combat that just a little bit is the fact that really what he's doing, he's kind of putting the microscope on the SWAC to let more people who are fans of him that may not be of HBCU football see what's actually going down in the HBCU sports world. And what I mean by that is people like myself and Dwayne and then you, Scott, along with, you know, the other people I mentioned, like James Verrett and Stephen A. Gaither and Collie, Luke Williams, another, like, we've been covering this stuff for a very, very long time. We know what the worth has been. We've been busting our tails for a number of years, showing what the people, you know, are doing on the HBCU realms. Every once in a while, you know about, oh, you know, this famous alum, this or whatever, and that. It's now the people in the people who aren't familiar with HBCU sports are now seeing what's going down with HBCU athletics, primarily in the SWAC, and then when you connect it to other conferences as well. You know, some people are like, oh, wait, there are other HBCUs? Oh, okay, cool. There's the MIA. Okay, that's cool. There's the CIAA. Okay, that's, you know, so like they're kind of seeing that or whatever. And a lot of that is definitely all, you know, homage to Coach Deion Sanders and what he's doing or whatever with Jackson State. Now, the other thing I have to say is this, though. A big kudos and shout out has to go to Dr. Charles McClellan, the commissioner of the SWAC. And the reason why I say that is that a lot of people do not realize how bad the SWAC was before he took over. Man, like it was bad financially to where, and I'm gonna just say it like this: rumor mill, there were some prominent schools. You could probably guess who these schools were. There were some prominent schools, at least 3, that were talking to some other conferences about getting out of the SWAC because of how bad things were. And you got to think, McClellan was a athletic director both at Prairie View and Texas Southern, kind of at the worst times that those schools could ever be at or whatever. PV following the big law, the 80-something game losing streak, and Texas Southern following, you know, the grade situation that caused them to basically like fire every single coach almost, and then afterwards, get rid of the football title or forfeit the football title and all that jazz. He was able to, change a whole lot of other things around. So he saw it as an athletic director. Eventually, the president and athletic directors in the SWAC were like, hey, we need somebody else. We need you. And his first year, man, he was able to get the SWAC to have some kind of financial profit, which was good. And I think they said what they ended up doing was it, I think for basketball, baseball, and softball during the tournament times, they had like a little banquet for those players. The all academic, the all SWAC ones. They had like a little bit. They bought them some trophies or whatever. Something they had been able to do because they just wasn't making that kind of money. And then, you look at it, then like years later, he was able to tweak the TV schedule. That is the biggest thing, I think, impact-wise, that has kind of helped the brand that we see with the SWAC now or whatever. And when I say that is this. SWAC fans will remember, you used to see a SWAC game on Thursday night like every week or whatever because previous administrations had sold their soul to do Thursday night games. And McClellan was like, I'm not doing that. We need to find a different alternative. I can't change it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tweak it. So eventually he was able to tweak something during the pandemic, that summer 2020 and all that. And he was able to tweak it to where they were able to add a flex rule to it. So more games are being flexed to ESPN3, ESPN Plus. And then from there, if linear ESPN, when I mean linear, if ESPN 1, 2, or you, or even ESPN News wanted to pull one of those digital games and put it on their product, they didn't have a problem doing it because they already got McClellan's approval. You couldn't do that prior, which is kind of crazy to think that ESPN can't pull their own product, but that's kind of the way the contract was set up. Literally. Yeah, man, that's how the contract was set up. So because of that, or whatever, it was easier to go ahead and do it. It's funny, if they would have actually did it, they would have owed the SWAC a whole lot of money because it's like a breach of contract, if you think about it. So when you think about all that, at the end of the day, Klown was able to do that, and that was in the summer of 2020 as he revamped the schedule. And then we got that spring season coming around. Obviously, Coach Sanders had been hired by Jackson State. I think he looked at it like, if I got this guy that's bringing a whole lot of attention or whatever, let me allow ESPN to pull more Jackson State games if possible, and I think that's really how a lot of whatever went to it. So because Dr. McClellan was able to rework that SWAC contract or whatever, you basically got every single Jackson State game on some form of ESPN one way or the other because he was able to tweak it. Now, once the contract is up and he's able to redo it, who knows what it's going to look like moving forward. But yeah, definitely shout out to Dr. McClellan for making those things happen. And also, too, for pulling in a lot of these sponsors. I mean, I'm on the SWAC website right now. General Motors, Rocket Mortgage, Academy Sports and Outdoors, Nike. Of course, they're part of the Home Depot Retool Your School thing. And the biggest one, Cricket Wireless. I will never forget how many people were laughing at the SWAC. But like, oh, they got Cricket Wireless. They couldn't get AT&T. They couldn't get T-Mobile or anybody else. No, we got Cricket Wireless. Well, guess what? The SWAC stuck with Cricket Wireless. Now Cricket Wireless is basically their largest sponsor. Cricket Wireless is your sponsor for the MEAC SWAC Challenge, the SWAC Football Championship, the Celebration Bowl, the basketball tournament, and if I'm not mistaken, the baseball tournament as well. So when you think about that, that's a lot of money that Cricket is putting into the SWAC product because Dr. Charles McClellan made a deal with them, and then the long-term stuff has turned around and has, made some dividends.
That's awesome.
And then the last thing I'll say is that, remember how I talked about how they had made a profit? Well, this past summer, I heard it from several from athletic directors saying that no SWAC school got less than $550,000 from the payout from the Southwestern Athletic Conference. Now, obviously, some schools got a little bit more due to just what was going on. Jackson State, for example, because think about it. They hosted the SWAC championship, and that's a lot of money. They kept majority of that money due to the way the SWAC championship set up. And then they went to Celebration Bowl, they get a big chunk of that, $1 million. But on top of that, no school got no less than $550,000 to go back into their athletic bank accounts. And that puts the SWAC as one of the top 3 FCS grossing conferences. And he said that with pride, with his chest out or whatever. And he said if it keeps going in about 2 or 3 years, they'll be matching some group of five conferences as well. So if I had to go ahead and just guess, I'm thinking he's probably going to match like the Mountain West, the MAC, and maybe Conference USA. If I had to go ahead and guess those or what, I think he's still a little ways away from like the Sun Belt, but those other ones I think for sure is definitely in that. So shout out to the leadership that he's been doing with that, and it's like a big gumbo pot, man. It all goes together, and then once you eat it up, it tastes all good, and you get good results.
Yeah, and shout out to the commissioner, man. That's great info, and and I'll say my last question for last, but I want to get the Wayne in here to sell his thing. But real quick, I just want to say, to hear that, that's very encouraging. Now I must ask the question: that $550,000, does that come from the HBCUGo stuff, or is that totally separate?
That's actually separate, because you got to think the HBCUGo stuff technically began this academic year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So come next year, whatever chunk you or whatever get or what, it'll be added to what is made throughout the entire year, which will be good, because remember the HBCUGo thing is a long-term deal that I'm pretty sure I would not be surprised in about 2 to 3 years they renegotiate that for a little bit more. I mean, that's me speculating, but I think that's probably where they're going to go. And of course, there's a whole lot of things that can go on with the media stuff as well. I'm just very interested to see who's going to come to the table to be like, hey, we want to be a part of this SWAC product. I do know this. Dr. McClellan has been on record with Dr. Cavill saying that he wants to have a primary contract, a secondary contract, a subsidiary contract, and then maybe like a territory contract. And it can now be done because of digital products now, man. So, let's say they rework something with ESPN as a primary. You already got Byron Allen as the secondary. Let's say, I don't know, NFL Network comes to them and like, hey, we want to do a game a week. Remember, we used to do a bunch of HBCU classics in the 2000s along with what we have or whatever. So let's say they decide to hop on board. Then that's another guaranteed game per week that you're going to have on. And if you do a territorial thing, that'll kind of fall under like a Bally Sports type ordeal. Obviously, I'm not in the decision-making room for that, but when you kind of look at it from the outside looking in, that could be a conversation that could happen.
Right. All right, Dwayne, you get the floor.
Yeah, because, it's interesting that you bring up who I shall not name, but the previous commissioner. When I first started my coverage in 2010, I want to say it was, I was still a stranger to what was going on in the SWAC. And just a couple of things that I saw that he who shall not be named was doing from a distance, it just seemed cool. But again, that's coming from an uneducated eye in terms of having championship games and pro arenas and not thinking about it from the monetary aspect in terms of how much money they were actually losing by doing those things. And it's interesting that you talked about the institutions that were looking to leave. For whatever reason, it seems as though that either people, of course, one, don't know about it, or two, didn't take that into consideration when they looked at the institutions that left the MEAC and why they did so when they also had similar type of leadership that was, I don't want to necessarily say that he was bleeding revenue, but he was losing out on a lot of revenue too, and just a lot of bad decision making, and wondered why they wondered why institutions like A&T and Hampton left for PWI conferences. And for those that don't understand regions, because there isn't another D1 HBCU conference there, but it made it so much easier for Florida A&M and Bethune-Cookman to come into the SWAC, even though they still are the furthest schools away for certain institutions. But that's another conversation for another time. But my thing is, God, the revenue aspect. How much of that deal that was originally discussed back in February and March with HBCUGo, how much of that money, because this should have originally, what was it, 10 years, $100 million?
Yes, that's what was talked about in a sense. If you actually go follow my guy Jeff Lightsey on Twitter, he has a good video breakdown of it as well. But what you just said was just about what it was for the initial. Because remember, things like this can change.
Okay. Oh, most definitely. But God, I think Mo for I'm gonna just because I'm learning so much and it's coming in. I'm also learning SWAC history as well in terms of how everything has transcended itself over the past couple of years. But my question is this, and I think it's the one that concerns me the most. I know there are a lot of people who are rooting for Deion to go because they're tired of the JSU fan base just running their mouths. And I understand because I was the same way just a few years ago as it pertains to my Aggies. But my thing is this, with everything that's coming about because of Deion Sanders being in Jackson and all of the attention that comes with it, my question is, how prepared at this moment is Commissioner McClellan and the rest of the athletic directors and presidents in the SWAC in case he leaves? How prepared are they to take care of the conference once he's no longer there?
So, and obviously this is going to be me just being objective or whatever, because I've never went to Dr. McCullough and be like, hey, what happens when Deion Sanders or whatever leaves? But no, I really think that I think Dr. McClellan, the presidents and the athletic directors, will still be A-okay with, with life after Coach Sanders, if that, really comes to fruition and stuff from there. And I say that based on the fact that, like, hey, a lot of the guys in the SWAC, they have the SWAC tie from a long time ago. So they understand what the lineage is like. They understand what the history is, the legacy, and things of that nature. It's just a matter of the platform that they have. What can they do to advance it? And I think that'll be not so much the issue, but the plan they need to kind of, work with just in general. Obviously, the budget things will be something for athletic directors still continue to go ahead and roll with. And also, let's not forget too, Dr. Charles McClellan said he's got about a decade-long plan in place to see the SWAC elevate themselves from football on the FCS level to possibly going up to a group of 5, FBS level. And we're about maybe still a 1/3 of that, first third of that way or whatever. I asked him about it, and he told me bluntly that at the end of the day, everybody knows what they need to do. Now, the next plan is how can you get everyone to the level of what you ever need to do from it, and then they can advance. Because one thing you can say at the end of the day is that you've never seen an entire conference just move from one level to the other. So because of that, he's talked to the NCAA. The NCAA is like, I don't really know what to actually tell you what to do with this. So it's one of those, you kind of got to make it up as you go, but you got to do it right as well. So, you have to tread lightly with that, for one. But then two, good thing Dr. McClellan has a good relationship with the people on the NCAA board. And also, let me go ahead and throw this out there too. I know we've been talking about football. Let's not forget, this year, he will be the co-chair of the NCAA men's basketball selection committee for the tournament. And then next year, he is the chair. And for people that don't really know what I'm talking about, okay, when you're on selection Sunday, when you're getting ready for March Madness and they have your entire field and you break it down, and then all of a sudden, they go to this random person or whatever sitting in an office and they're like, okay, why didn't such and such get selected? Why was this team number 1 and 2 or whatever? He will be that person that breaks it down. He will be the person in the boardroom that will have the final say-so on who gets in and who gets out. That is him. So the SWAC commissioner will be in charge of, by far, one of the most important committees on the NCAA level, probably right behind the college football playoff championship. So that's another thing that for sure the eyeballs will be on HBCU athletics just because of that in the upcoming years too. So there are a lot of good things he's got going on, and also his leadership. And I think the other good thing too is that when you ask other presidents and athletic directors and even coaches, there's not too many things that people can be like, oh, I don't like the way commissioner's doing this. Like, you don't really hear that too much. So I think because Dr. McClellan is very, very transparent with what he wants to do, and he's very transparent when it comes to just getting out to the schools and getting out to coaches or whatever and stuff. Like, I think that's a really, really good thing because he's approachable or whatever. I mean, I've covered a number of A&M games this year. Unfortunately, I didn't go to the Magic City Classic this past week because my son was a little under the weather. But I'm pretty sure if he wasn't in Jackson, he was there for Magic City Classic. But, I've seen Dr. McClellan at 2 games this year just for Alabama A&M. I'm pretty sure he makes his rounds or whatever. And he's not just like in the press box. Like, dude's walking the sideline. He walks through the stands. The reason why I know this, I've seen so many people take pictures with him or whatever, and then you'll just go down social media and be like, hey, look who I spoke to. Look who I caught up with or what. He's a very personal guy. So when you have somebody like that, it makes you feel good about where you're going or whatever with it. Now, granted, there's going to be some people that think differently or whatever. They ain't going to call no names or whatever, but, they think differently. But just understand where the SWAC was before him as a commissioner and where they are now. It's like night and day, man.
That's dope to hear, man. I'm sorry, Dwayne. I was going to get this sponsor read right quick, and I promise I'll bounce right back to you. But anyway, I mean, listen to y'all talk. I kind of forgot to mention the sponsor. Anyway, I'm going to give a quick shout out to our friends at BetUs.com. So listen up, sports bettors. Your favorite sports book, BetUs.com, is back for our 28th year of NFL action. With the industry's biggest sign-up bonus up to 200%, BetUS offers our members the opportunity to cash in for all your favorite sports, including NFL, UFC, and MLB. And if you're looking for live in-game betting, credible odds with daily odds boosters, props, and parlays, we got it. And how about fast payouts and exceptional one-on-one customer service? We got that too. So log into betus.com or call 800-792-3887. That's 800-79-BET-US. You also use the promo code TKT for the Klown ties to get those perks as well. So betus.com, where the game begins. So Dwayne, back to you, sir.
Oh, real quick, I was just going to say, with Mo announcing that, they were talking about Commissioner McClellan's new appointment into the NCAA selection committee. Mo has already let us know that a SWAC team will be a number 1 seed in the 2024 men's NCAA tournament. So you heard it from Mo first.
There you go.
Yeah, that's been the biggest thing, or the biggest talking point is, of course, the future of the SWAC and what they will do. And again, let it be known, I'm like you, Mo. I'm not in disagreement to what Coach Prime is most definitely doing at Jackson State. Mm-hmm. A couple of things that he says I disagree with, but I can disagree with some of his words, but at the same time, be a fan of the things that he's doing, not only for Jackson State or for the SWAC, but for HBCUs as a whole. But my whole concern was, of course, things moving forward, because the days of Pete Richardson are done. The days of Eddie Robinson are done. The days of it's interesting because Buddy Pugh is most definitely a rarity in collegiate athletics as a whole, not just HBCUs, but collegiate athletics, when you have a guy that's there for more than 5 years in one spot. So it's not that I'm trying to rush him out the door. It's what the climate of collegiate athletics is. If you're good, if you're that good or that bad, you're going to be out the door, regardless of who you are. It doesn't matter. And it's just the thing, like I said, like Scott has said, the fact that I consider him to be a unicorn, and the type of attention that he can draw that no one else can draw. And I found it funny at the end of the spring season in 2020, everyone's like, we need to get a Deion Sanders. You need to get a Deion Sanders. It's only one of those.
There is.
They don't make those everywhere. So you can't follow that model. And my concern, not only just for Jackson State or the SWAC, but was with HBCU athletics as a whole. And I understand that what he does doesn't fully pour over into the MEAC or to the CIAA or to the SEAC, but they still get a residual of it. And my thing is, what are they going to do once he's no longer there? And that was my concern with it. And
that's the $1 million question, man.
That is the $1 million question. And I'm glad to hear that at least McClellan has a plan past that. My thing is, what is everybody else going to do? Not just the commissioner of the SWAC, but the ADs and presidents everywhere else. What are they going to do once he's no longer with us?
Correct. And here's another thing, Dwayne. You have to think about this too. I love how you mentioned how so many people are saying we need to go get a Deion Sanders. We need to go whatever. That's not the case for everybody. You need to get a person that's going to fit your program and elevate your program. I mean, I can go ahead and say this. Before Deion got to Jackson State, I mean, look, Jackson State was probably in one of the worst scenarios ever for football that I've ever seen them be in. And that's not me talking as a Southern alumnus who played against Jackson State football-wise or whatever, when Rick Comedy was their head coach, it was one of their better years. Like, Jackson State was in a bad scenario football-wise, and to see what he's been able to do and turn it around is, nothing short of really a miracle and just hard work going in it or whatever. But at the same time, everybody is not going to be able to go ahead and get that. And the reason why I say that is, like, I remember saying, oh, you need to go get Ed Reed. You need to go get Marshall.
We talked about that.
Go and get Ray Lewis or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry, but I feel like at the end of the day, even those guys show interest. You have to see what's the best interest for your school and for your products or whatever. I mean, one thing you can say, at least Coach Prime had coaching experience. With the exception of Ed Reed, none of these other guys that I just mentioned have coaching experience. And even Ed Reed went on record and said, I'm not ready to be a head coach. Like, I need some more time. He said those things. Because he said those things, that lets you know that he's very, very honest and he understands what needs to be done and what goes on, in everyday life with him trying to potentially move on to the next stages in their career. I remember people saying, oh, Southern needs to go and get Aeneas Williams. I'm like, Aeneas Williams ain't leaving his pulpit to come and be a football coach. Like, he is not doing that. Like, seriously. Like, don't get me wrong, I think Aeneas would be a great addition to Southern University staff, but let's be for real. He loves the Lord a little bit more than what he loves college football. He does, and that's just what it is. So because of that, you have to just find who fits the best situation overall from program to program, just in general. I mean, obviously Jackson got Deion. He was able to fundraise and do kind of whatever. But that won't happen at every single school just because of the constraints certain schools have in scenarios. Now, I will say this, though. I am interested to see how other schools will step up their game in the recruiting aspect, especially now because of NILs and also because of the transfer portal. So those two things will continue to play a major key. I will also say this, too. APR will be reinstated very, very soon. So that is going to be very important and vital for every single school who's either getting ready to change leadership or going through some rough times or still trying to stay up on top. That's going to be very, very crucial in what's coming up. Obviously, it got put on hold because of COVID, but it's coming back. I'm not sure if it's this spring or the following spring, but it is coming back, and it could be some very, very hurt folks or whatever if appeals aren't made or if adjustments aren't made as well. So if student athletes are out there watching us or whatever, man, look, stay in your books, graduate, do those two things or whatever. You play on the field is one thing, but the opportunity to get good grades and graduate helps your school far more than just winning on the field. It helps them in the long term, and also it helps the school keep scholarships too.
Right.
Yeah, Mo, you brought up something that's a whole nother sticky wicket in terms of HBCUs and APRs, because for those that follow that, they know that we tend to get hit with that the most than any other. As small of an amount of institutions that we seem to get hit the most with that. But again, I don't want to get into that because that's a whole nother monster. That'll be a whole nother show by itself. Scott, do you have any more questions, man?
Yeah, man. And we'll be having you back on, by the way. I mean, we'll really enjoy it. I'm getting educated. Like I said, I've been educated all show long. So you're going to be best believe we're going to have you back for other stuff too. But we'll get you out here on this.
Sounds good, man. I'm always happy to just share information and also let people know what I know just in general. I mean, I always look at it like this. I'm like a sponge. I like to soak a whole lot of things, and if I can share it and for the betterment of whoever, Obviously, I will definitely do that. My wife jokes at me a lot of time, or make a joke on me and be like, "Oh, what are you doing today?" or whatever. When I'm on the iPad looking up more of the history of the world, I'm like, "Actually, I am for the most part because my other degree besides mass communication is in history. So you utilize those things, to the best of ability. And of course, I like to, read up on a whole lot of things and, share the history of the SWAC and things of that nature. Because one thing I've always learned, I've learned at a young age, and I've kind of ingrained it in myself, is the quote that Alex Haley used in his book, of Roots, when it came to what inspired him to write Roots, which was basically, I don't know where I'm going in my future until I know where I came from first. So that's why, I've always taken that up or what. I actually wrote a research paper on that exact thing in high school. So, and I've now kind of utilized that with athletics in general or whatever. And here's the funny thing too. Yes, I talk about all this HBCU stuff or whatever, but I actually know a little bit more about other things like the SEC and NFL and things of that nature or whatever. It just so happens that obviously the HBCU stuff just sticks out just a little bit more or whatever. Sure. And at the end of the day, I try to put local whatever first, because you got to think, in the realm, there's only so much of us that's talking about HBCU things. Right. In the realm of SEC, I'm competing with the beat writers and the podcast people and Paul Feinbaum and Marty and McGee.
Don't get me started. I love him, but don't get me started on him. Well, you've been generous with our time, man. So let's get you out on this last thing. And you mentioned this, touched on this earlier, and Dwayne and I, we've discussed this many times in the past. And that is the possibility of the SWAC taking the show from the FCS to the FBS. Now, that's been bandied about early this season and early this season, late last season, right? Because again, popularity brings a lot of attention and brings a lot of possibilities and potential in other areas. So you already mentioned what the SWAC commissioner said as it pertains to that. If you're to look at your crystal ball, how long do you think that could happen? Because it sounds like it's really going to be the inevitable. So basically, at least the group of five level, definitely. So I think it's going to be in 5 years. It wouldn't shock me if the SWAC made the move to the FBS and then be one of the group of five, maybe be the group of six, I guess, at that time. So what are you thinking if you look at your crystal ball? Says, I think it's going to be the inevitable, the way you explained it. So what are you thinking?
I would be in agreement with you or whatever. I would say kind of keep an eye on the period between maybe 2027 and 2029, maybe right before the decade ends, because there's actually going to be a lot of changes around that time with major college football, and it's going to trickle down to mid-major college football technically or whatever, from that. So there's going to be some changes and all that. And also another thing I'm really, really thinking about, conference realignment, it continues every single year. So I think with that happening, that's why I think for the SWAC, if everybody can get their ducks in the row, that's probably the pinpoint period we want to kind of look at. So maybe the latter part of this decade right now. Who knows? It may be a little bit earlier than that. Obviously, a main thing is going to be finances, because everybody needs to kind of really get on the same financial plan or whatever. Obviously, when you look at finances or whatever, Prairie View, Southern, Jackson State, Texas Southern, they're kind of all in the high range, while Alabama State, then you got Valley, Pine Bluff or what. So at some point they've got to kind of all meet in the middle. If they can all meet in the middle, I think that's going to be a big thing to kind of help elevate whatever to possibly get the SWAC to the FBS level. And also along with that, more money comes with that too. One thing I kind of wrote up last year when I was explaining to somebody was, okay, let's say the SWAC was in the position of the Sun Belt or something. So if you go last year, the SWAC had a number of teams that would have been considered bowl eligible, So you would have had your SWAC champ, let's say Celebration Bowl still stays, even though. Okay, let me back up. Okay, let's say the MEAC does this too. So Celebration Bowl stays intact or whatever.
Right.
You still got your SWAC champ and your MEAC champ or whatever. Both FBS now conferences, they're still squaring off in the Celebration Bowl. You can then all of a sudden take your SWAC championship loser, who still has like 7-8 wins, which would have been Prairie View. You could have put them in. I'm saying if I'm comparing it to the Sun Belt, you could have put them like in the bowl game that's down there, maybe like in Mobile. Then you could have took like an Alabama A&M. You could have put them in a bowl game that's like in Montgomery because they had 7 wins. You could have put actually not. Let's not even take Prairie. Let's put Prairie View in Shreveport. Let's put them like Independence. You could have put FAMU in Mobile for that bowl game. You know, and think about it, like that's 4 teams that are going to bowl games that are paying, you know, anywhere from 6, 7, 800,000 or whatever. So I know the one in Mobile pays like a little bit over $1 million now. Used to be Lending Tree Bowl and Dollar General. I'm not exactly sure what they call it now because they've changed names or whatever. But doing that on the FBS level, not only do you get that money for the school, but the conference gets money. And 2, that's one thing. And then the college football playoff pays out conferences as well. Obviously, we wouldn't be a P5, but we would still get large chunks of it. Or whatever. So kind of look at it, it would be like the equivalent of like how Vanderbilt gets all this SEC money, even though they're only really good in baseball or whatever. That's how the SWAC would look as a group of 5 getting money from the playoff payouts. And also don't forget the playoff will be changing, which means that it could be possible new TV contracts, which only means more money as well, because they've already said, like basically been set in stone that when they expand, they're gonna need more than just ESPN and ABC. So would not be surprised if you start to see Fox and NBC's name come up to it. And for the old heads, if you remember in the 90s, pre-BCS when we had the Bowl Alliance, I remember New Year's Day, for some reason, you'd have like the Sugar Bowl on ABC, you have the Orange Bowl on NBC, and then you have the Sugar Bowl and you have the Fiesta Bowl like on CBS. They were all at the same time. They were all at the same time. I used to wonder, like, why is my dad flipping in between channels or whatever and stuff? But that's what it is. Now, obviously, I think they will still kind of work a parallel. Like, okay, look, as soon as you're done, we're going to this one or whatever. So that could be something else that we always just have to kind of just think about as well moving forward. But to answer your question, Scotty, or whatever, I would say let's look at that those final 3 years of the decade is when I think that move will probably be made, which means somewhere in the mid part of the decade, you'll start to see some of the workings for all that to actually come through and happen. But, I'm excited about it one way or the other. And I think overall, HBCU athletics on not just the D1 level, I think really on all levels, it's like really, really starting to like really show and get their due as well with it. So it's going to be some fun stuff. I'm just glad to be a part of the HBCU family as both a grad and also someone who covers it from a media standpoint.
So where can they find?
I'm sorry, Mo. I have to ask this one question real quick, Mo.
What's up, man?
Just give us a quick answer. God, there's no way in the world I can get through tonight without asking you this question, especially having TV roots. Why is it that halftime shows aren't shown during broadcast?
I am glad you asked that, Mr. I am glad you asked that.
I couldn't. It slipped my mind up until just then. I couldn't let that go. I'm
glad you asked that.
Because I have my theories, but I know they're nowhere near being what that true answer is.
Oh, I'm pretty sure what you're thinking is probably partially right. So here's the thing. Halftime of a football game, basketball, and a basketball game are the most lucrative times for commercials. Those are the commercials that any channel that puts on a sports broadcast, that's where the most money for commercial time is spent. So either you will not see halftime shows or whatever for a lot of HBCU things because they're trying to sell those commercials, or you're also having that studio show which is sponsored by such and such. Now the way to combat that is to get a sponsor to offset it. Thus, and I just love how can you go ahead and use an example because like it took me many years to figure this out or whatever. Why the Bayou Classic was showing it all the time, but nobody else was. The Bayou Classic was the perfect example of, okay, look, we're going to use Coca-Cola or State Farm or McDonald's or whatever to offset those costs for halftime, and we're going to show you at least 85% of halftime. And I remember as a kid watching, Ahmad Rashad do his halftime or whatever report, and then they were like, hey, the halftime or what, and they would go to like a commercial and then come back with Rambling, go to another commercial, come back with Southern. They'll do the in-studio thing or whatever. And they're like, hey, halftime was sponsored by or brought to you by such and such and all that. And now I know for the last like 5 years it's been Procter & Gamble, P&G. So because of that, when you have an offsetting sponsor, that allows you to basically show it, because we know HBCU fans do want to see the bands at halftime. I know for a number of years, the Southern Heritage Classic, they were sponsored by AutoZone, and AutoZone would pay those, pay those royalties and pay that pay those things to make it up to offset it. Maddie City Classic is another one. McDonald's and Coca-Cola, they do the same thing. Y'all help me out here. Florida's A&M against Jackson State. What was that? Orange Blossom Classic.
Orange Blossom Classic, yeah.
Yeah. Wasn't it Denny's that was the main sponsor for that?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so Denny's paid a certain thing to offset it or whatever for you to check it out or whatever, where they had majority on the digital and then the rest on the whatchamacallit. So you always need an offset or whatever to do that. If not, then you don't get that halftime report, because that is the most lucrative time for commercials. That's why, like, and it's not just college football. Same thing with NFL. I mean, why do you think they do those studio shows? Because people are paying big bucks to see those studio shows and see those highlights or whatever. The Super Bowl halftime show brought to you by who? Pepsi. Pepsi's paying a whole lot of money, for him to basically take a whole 20-minute set for people to be singing during that time in that sense. So that's the main answer for you, Dwayne, that the halftime is the most lucrative time and basically the most costliest of the commercials. So you need an offset to make it happen or whatever in certain instances. Now, does it work every single time? Absolutely not, or whatever, because some people just have a little bit too much pride in what they do. But in most cases, there are ways around it. It just depends on what the actual people in charge of a classic or a game, it's like what they're working with in most cases.
So where can they find you, sir, on social media?
Yes, sir. So on Twitter, you can find me at Mo Carter, MOCARTER, Fox, FOX 54. And then on Facebook, you can also find me at Mo Carter WZDX News. Obviously, I'm pretty active on both. On Facebook, I'm more active with like kind of just posting my stories or whatever. But Twitter, you'll see me interacting with a whole lot of folks, just including my main man Dwayne. in general, obviously I cover Alabama A&M primarily here in Huntsville, so you'll see a lot of A&M stuff. But then you'll see a lot of SWAC things as well that are making some things happen. And I mean, and I love doing it just in general from there.
Yeah.
But yeah, Mo, thanks for coming on, man, because primarily this show is very Mid-Atlantic central. And to get a voice coming from the Southeast, especially from the SWAC, has been a breath of fresh air, because a lot of times I'm just regurgitating a lot of the stuff that I see you guys or the stuff that I actually hear during weekly pressers come from there. But it's better to get someone who's most definitely entrenched in that SWAC culture, because I ain't SWAC. So I thought it'd be better for me to go ahead and get someone to come in and talk about it, especially after Scott most definitely suggested it. Yeah.
Oh, no problem, guys. No problem. Like I said, Dwayne, I always appreciate the conversation you and I have on social, and then in with the DMs and all that too, dude. Because I admit, I don't know every single thing about the MEAC, but or the CIAA, but then you drop these dimes. I'm like, oh, okay, so that's how that's going down, and that's what's happening. So feeling is definitely mutual, and obviously, I think it's more of a culture thing too. As well, I know a lot of things going on here in the South, but on the East Coast, I don't really know as much. Just in general, I probably know enough to get by, but then you start getting in the deep roots of things. I'm like, Oh, okay,
Yeah.
because obviously, like for example, I know for sure football is king down here where I'm at or whatever. While football is a big thing for where you guys are located, no basketball is like 10 times bigger,
Yeah.
Mhm.
in a
Yeah.
sense. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Appreciate that. Yeah, it's all good, man. Again, thank you. You busy, man. Thank you for blessing us with your time. Thank you for
Yes.
educating us, especially me. Thank you for educating us on that and the message as well. You can find me on Fox 54 News in Huntsville, Alabama, Huntsville's finest. As for Dwayne, check out his great work you see on the backdrop, the yard, HBCU.com, wraps up all things HBCU sports. Sleazy Radio every Tuesday night on Facebook Live and on YouTube. And last but not least, HeroSports.com. I'm sorry. Wraps up all things FCS, athletics, stage HBCUs. Find me at www.theclowntimes.net. I promise y'all, I'll update my website. I promise you. I've been slacking, but again, you've got this thing called life, careers, and fatherhood. So I'm trying to balance all that stuff. But anyway, look for some new stuff tomorrow and into the weekend. Also, you can please subscribe, comment, share, and like. I did it all backwards. To my YouTube channel and get the merch at cafepress.com, social Clown Time Sports. Thank y'all for tuning in. Y'all take care. Be blessed. Have a great weekend. We out here. Peace.